You twist open a plastic bottle of water, and there on the side, stamped in faint little print, is a date, an expiration date, on water, and if you stop and think about it for even a second, something about that quietly does not add up at all. Water is one of the oldest things on Earth. The very water you are drinking right now may once have fallen as rain on the backs of dinosaurs. It does not rot, it does not spoil, and it simply does not go bad the way a carton of milk left out on the counter does. And yet nearly every bottle of water, on nearly every shelf in every store, carries a printed date, as if the water sealed inside were quietly counting down towards some mysterious future moment, when it suddenly, inexplicably stops being safe for you to drink. It makes no obvious sense. That little date hides a surprising story, and it has almost nothing to do with the water at all. It is a story about plastic, about a strange old law, and about how enormous companies managed to move many millions of nearly identical bottles across the entire world without losing track of them. To understand it, we have to stop staring at the water and start looking closely at the thing wrapped around it, the bottle itself. Because, as it turns out, the date printed on that label is really a date about the plastic and the packaging, not about the drink inside. A plastic bottle feels solid, sealed, and reassuring, like a tiny transparent fortress built around the water. But plastic is not a perfect, impenetrable wall. On a scale far too small for your eyes to ever see, it behaves a little more like a very slow, very patient sieve. Over long stretches of months and years, the plastic can slowly interact with the water it holds. Tiny traces of the material itself may gradually drift inward into the water, while gases from the surrounding outside air can very slowly seep inward through the walls of the bottle in return. None of this makes the water dangerous within the time a bottle normally sits on a store shelf, but it can change something gentler, and something you would actually notice: the taste. Older bottled water can slowly pick up a faint, flat, slightly plastic-like note that was never there at first. Then there is the air. Sealed inside every bottle, just above the water, is a small trapped pocket of gas. Over long stretches of time, oxygen and carbon dioxide slowly move in and out through the plastic and the seal, gently nudging the flavor of the water ever so slightly off. The water itself, chemically speaking, is still basically just water. It has not spoiled and it has not become harmful. But bottlers care deeply about taste, because a customer who sips something flat, stale, or faintly strange will always blame the brand on the label, never the passing of the calendar. So here is the first honest answer to the mystery. The date is mostly about the packaging and the flavor, and not really about the safety of the water at all. It roughly marks how long the bottle can be expected to keep the water tasting fresh, crisp, and clean. But there is a second reason hiding underneath, and it is the real beating heart of this whole mystery. It has nothing to do with plastic, with taste, or with chemistry at all. Instead, it comes down to a single, very specific law passed long ago in one American state. Back in 1987, the state of New Jersey passed a rule requiring that all food products sold within its borders carry a clearly printed expiration date, and that the date be set no later than 2 years from the day the product was originally made. A sensible-sounding rule. The intention behind it was perfectly reasonable. The idea was simply to help ordinary shoppers know how fresh their food really was before they bought it. But the law swept up absolutely everything the state legally counted as food. And in that strict legal sense, bottled water counted as a food too. So, quite suddenly, any water bottled or sold anywhere in New Jersey now needed its own printed date, exactly like a carton of eggs, a tub of yogurt, or a fresh loaf of bread. And that one small requirement created a surprisingly large and practical headache for the water companies. Bottling plants ship their product all across the country, and often all around the world. Carefully sorting out which specific bottles from a production run were headed for New Jersey, and which were bound for everywhere else, would have been slow, costly, and maddeningly, needlessly complicated for every single company involved. So the companies simply did the easiest possible thing. They started stamping a date onto every single bottle everywhere, no matter where it was going. It was far cheaper and far simpler to just date all of them than to run 2 entirely separate production lines for the sake of one state. And that is precisely why, decades later, a bottle of water filled thousands of miles away from New Jersey still carries a printed date today. One small, local, well-meaning law quietly rippled outward, further and further, until dated water bottles simply became the ordinary, unquestioned, invisible standard almost everywhere on the planet. But the story does not actually stop with the law. Once those printed dates existed on everything, the giant beverage companies quickly discovered that they were genuinely, unexpectedly useful for a completely different reason. Namely, keeping careful track of an absolute ocean of nearly identical, indistinguishable plastic bottles. Picture a vast warehouse, stacked all the way up to the ceiling with wooden pallets of water, millions upon millions of bottles, every one of them looking exactly the same as the next. Without some kind of marker, telling this week's fresh batch from last year's would be very nearly impossible. A simple printed date turns each of those bottles into something traceable. Warehouse workers can properly rotate the stock, always selling the oldest bottles first, and make absolutely sure that nothing gets quietly forgotten and left to sit in some dark, dusty corner of the warehouse for years on end. That very same date also becomes a genuine lifeline if something ever goes wrong. If a single batch happens to be contaminated during the bottling process, the date lets a company quickly pinpoint and recall exactly the right bottles, instead of anxiously pulling every bottle they have ever made from every shelf everywhere. So the humble little date quietly does triple duty all at once. It hints at freshness for the shopper, it satisfies those old and lingering laws, and it lets enormous supply chains keep careful order among millions of identical, silent bottles. Practical and useful, then, and not really so mysterious after all. Now, let us talk about storage, because how you actually keep a bottle matters far, far more than the particular number printed on its side. Heat, much more than the simple passing of time, is what truly changes bottled water, speeding up every slow interaction quietly happening inside the plastic. Leave a bottle sitting in a hot parked car, or out in direct summer sunlight, and all that warmth strongly encourages the plastic and the water to interact with each other far faster. That is exactly when the flat, slightly off taste tends to appear the very soonest, and the strongest. So the simple, practical advice is to keep your bottled water cool, shaded, and well away from any strong smells, since plastic can even quietly absorb odors from the things around it. Stored sensibly like that, plain sealed water stays perfectly pleasant to drink far, far beyond its printed date. Sparkling water, though, is a little different, and here the date genuinely does matter more. Those lively bubbles are simply dissolved gas, and that gas very slowly escapes outward through the seal over time. An old, forgotten bottle of sparkling water can quietly turn completely flat, still, and lifeless. Flavored waters, vitamin waters, and anything at all with added ingredients are different yet again. Those extra additions, the flavors, colors, and vitamins, genuinely can degrade over time, slowly losing their color, their taste, or their strength. For those products, an expiration date really is doing real and meaningful work. But plain, still, sealed water is remarkably, almost stubbornly patient. Kept cool and left unopened, it simply does not become unsafe the moment the date on the label happens to pass. At the very worst, it might just taste a little less crisp and bright than it did the day it was bottled. And this is the key distinction quietly hiding right there on the label. Most of these dates are really best by dates. They are gentle promises about quality and taste, not hard, urgent warnings about safety. The water inside does not magically transform into something dangerous or harmful overnight when the day arrives. There is one small catch worth genuinely knowing about, though. Once you open a bottle and start drinking directly from it, your mouth naturally introduces a little bacteria into the water. And a half-finished bottle left sitting warm for several days is a very different story than a fully sealed one. But sealed and stored sensibly somewhere cool, a plain bottle of water is honestly one of the most stable and forgiving things in your entire kitchen. That printed date is far less a strict deadline and much more a gentle, cautious little suggestion from the very people who happen to make it. And once you truly notice this, you start to see the exact same pattern playing out all over the grocery store. Dates confidently stamped onto things that barely change at all over time, printed there mostly out of habit, out of caution, and out of the simple tidy convenience of following the rules. Salt, which is a plain mineral older than life on Earth itself, very often carries a printed date. So does ordinary white sugar. And so, remarkably, does honey, which archaeologists have actually found still perfectly edible after thousands upon thousands of years sealed away inside ancient, long-forgotten Egyptian tombs. In almost every single case, manufacturers simply choose caution. A date that arrives a little too early costs the company very little indeed. But a customer who tastes something stale, or who quietly starts to worry about their safety, could end up costing that company real trust, loyalty, and future sales. There is a certain legal comfort wrapped up in it as well. A clearly printed date quietly protects the company, gently shifting responsibility onto the calendar itself, so that no unhappy customer can ever later stand up and claim that they were simply never told when the product was actually made. So the expiration date printed on your bottle of water is really a lot like a small, honest little piece of theater. It very much looks like a strict, serious warning about the water itself. But it is really, quietly, all about plastic, paperwork, logistics, and careful, cautious business habits. So what should you actually do with an old, dusty, sealed bottle discovered at the very back of a forgotten cupboard? Well, if it was stored somewhere cool and dark, and it still smells and tastes perfectly fine when you open it, then it is almost certainly completely good to drink. And the next time you happen to spot that tiny printed date on the side of a water bottle, you will finally understand the quiet truth hiding behind it. It is not, and never really was, counting down the life of the water at all. It is quietly counting the life of the bottle. Because the most ordinary things all around us are almost never quite as simple as they first seem. Even a small printed date on a humble bottle of water can quietly reveal just how carefully, and how very cautiously, our entire modern world is labeled, dated, and tracked. So look again.